The courtroom smelled like old carpet and colder intentions. My heels clicked once against the floor before I sat down quiet, third row from the front. No one noticing me except maybe the bailiff out of habit. I wasn't wearing a badge today. Not on the outside, at least. My name is Natasha Morgan. I was born in this very county, raised in a house where silence was safer than truth, where smiles were currency, and my father's voice could level a room faster than any storm. Most people in this room thought I worked for some outreach program, maybe helped with addiction cases or food stamps. Franklin Morgan, seated confidently at the defense table, looked exactly how I remembered him, expensive suit shoulders back smirk like a politician who already knows the vote count. He barely glanced my way, which was predictable. In his story, I was always a footnote. Elaine Morgan. My mother sat across from him, smaller than I remembered her, looking bones pulled tight by years of endurance. The judge's voice echoed as he read the property summary. Half the assets, the condo in Miami, the 21 Mercedes, and Addendum D, the catch-all list of miscellaneous holdings. Franklin's lawyer barely stifled a yawn. To him, this was already a win. But I knew something no one else in that room did. I knew that a signature could be a noose if you laced the paper right. I'd spent 18 months weaving this moment together like a spider waits in a still web. Now all I had to do was step forward. The silence was starting to thick and settle like a fog in everyone's chest. And that's when I stood. Just a gentle push against the bench in front of me. Franklin's head turned. His smirk twitched like he was trying to place me. My mother blinked once, confused. I didn't speak right away. I reached up, removed the black-rimmed glasses I wore out of habit more than need. Then I looked to the judge and spoke the words that started to peel the air apart. "Your Honor, if I may address the court." It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The weight in my voice came from everything I hadn't said for years. From the child who watched too much. From the daughter who listened at the doors. From the woman who waited long enough. Everything stopped moving. The pen in Franklin's lawyer's hand paused, mid-scribble. Elaine turned slowly. The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded. No one asked who I was. That was the first clue they had missed everything. And they were about to learn that I hadn't come here today as a daughter. There was a time when dinner at the Morgan house felt like a press conference, and my father was always the headline speaker. Franklin would sit at the head of the table like a CEO holding court, his drink full, his voice louder than the rest of us combined. Jason, my older brother, was the golden boy from the moment he could walk without falling. He had the easy charm. My father respected the confidence that never had to be earned. When Jason got into business school, Franklin opened a bottle of 30-year scotch and gave a toast like the heir to a kingdom had been named. When I got into college for social work, he nodded once and asked if I needed help filling out scholarship forms. I wasn't jealous. Not exactly. I just learned early how to shrink myself in a house that had no corners for people like me. Jason played baseball. I wrote essays. Jason helped host client dinners. I volunteered at a shelter on weekends and came home to silence. Franklin never said I was a failure, not out loud, but he also never asked to hear what I cared about. Elaine, my mother, stayed quiet through it all. Her voice was soft, rarely raised, always folded inside phrases like, "Be patient," or "Your father means well." She became an expert in redirecting tension, pouring tea, when voices rose, changing subjects with the precision of someone trained to disarm time bombs. But even she looked relieved when Jason was doing well. It meant the storm passed over her. There were moments when I wanted to scream, not for attention, but just to hear if anyone would respond. I didn't need praise, I just wanted to be seen. But in the Morgan household, the spotlight didn't move. It belonged to Jason. The rest of us were just silhouettes at the edges. Looking back, I don't blame him. Jason never asked for the pedestal, but he never stepped off it either. He was too comfortable with the light on his face to wonder what the dark felt like. And I lived in that dark. Quiet. Observant. Waiting. not to be chosen, but to choose for myself when the time came. While Franklin Morgan liked to believe his daughter handed out pamphlets and processed grant paperwork, I was logging 10-hour days in a federal task force office no one in the city even knew existed. On paper, I worked in community outreach. In reality, I was a financial crimes investigator assigned to track shell companies used for laundering money through hospitality businesses. For nearly 2 years, I mapped the empire my father had built, not from board meetings or family dinners, but through wire transfers routed through Belize, invoices forged to mask luxury goods, and names of vendors that didn't exist anywhere, but inside spreadsheets that never left my laptop. Every week, I sat across from men in suits who never once asked about my last name. I wasn't the daughter of Franklin Morgan to them. I was the analyst who found the hidden accounts no one else could. I knew how to make myself invisible. I'd had a lifetime of practice. Franklin always underestimated me, and I used that blindness like a shield. While he played king of his castle, I tracked every brick he laid. I memorized the names of every limited liability company tied to his hotels, every discrepancy in the labor contracts, every cash transaction that didn't align with reported earnings. What he didn't know was that the woman he saw as a harmless social worker had already briefed a senior federal prosecutor twice, that I'd already submitted the first 30 pages of a sealed report titled Operation Silverplate, that the case folder with his name on it had been active for months before his divorce papers were even served. I wasn't watching him fall. I was guiding the drop, quietly, precisely. And with every signature he placed on a legal document, he was walking one step closer to the trap I'd been building. He just hadn't realized yet who was holding the rope. The hallway outside courtroom 3B was lined with marble and silence. I stood near the water fountain 10 feet from where my father cornered my mother. His voice wasn't raised, but the words had weight, sharp and deliberate, like the back edge of a knife. He told her she had been nothing but dead weight, that everything she had came from him, that after 30 years of marriage she would walk away with nothing because that's exactly what she deserved. Elaine didn't respond. She flinched at the first insult, but stood still, eyes cast downward, fingers clutching her purse like it was the only anchor she had left. Then came the slap, sudden, loud, and unapologetic. It echoed off the hard walls and hung in the air like the smell of something burned. She stumbled back a step. Her hand went to her cheek. People turned. Some gasped, others froze, but I didn't move. 2 court officers nearby looked toward me, unsure. One shifted his weight, ready to intervene. I met his eyes and gave the faintest shake of my head. Not now. Not yet. The heat in my chest surged, then drained, replaced by something colder, heavier. I wasn't Natasha, the daughter, in that moment. I was Natasha, the investigator. What just happened wasn't family drama, it was an assault. And it happened in a courthouse covered in security cameras. Franklin turned and walked away without looking back. Like it meant nothing. Like she meant nothing. My mother stood still, trembling, red blooming across her cheek. But it wasn't the pain that struck me. It was the way she didn't cry. How she just kept breathing, quiet and broken in the middle of a building meant to deliver justice. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to scream. But instead, I took out my phone and opened my secure note app. I typed the exact time. I logged the exact location. I marked it as evidence. That slap was his final mistake. He thought it was the end of a conversation. But to me, it was a confession. A brutal, undeniable symbol of everything he believed about women, about power, about what he could get away with. He had just put the last nail in his own coffin. I wasn't going to stop him. I was going to bury him with it. Kenneth Blake didn't ask many questions. He just watched me with the steady focus of a man used to hearing bold ideas crash before they landed. I placed the file on the table between us and opened to the page I'd flagged in red. We won't get him through force. He's too proud for threats, too slippery for direct pressure. But pride also makes men predictable. If we can wrap the trap in something that looks like a win, he'll walk straight into it. The divorce is our Trojan horse. He's obsessed with control, especially over money. If he thinks he's winning the asset battle, he'll stop watching the war. Kenneth didn't speak, just nodded once, then flipped to the back of the file. That's where the preliminary shell company chart sat color-coded and sourced from 6 months of subpoenas. But it wasn't just spreadsheets I brought him. It was Elaine. My mother still had the old ledgers. Franklin had forced her out of the business years ago, told her she was in the way. But she'd kept everything. Faded pages with columns of payments, handwritten invoices, duplicate receipts he thought were destroyed. She never threw away the truth. I found them tucked into a box behind her sewing machine. She looked at me like I had uncovered a time capsule of someone she used to be. Her hands trembled when she touched the pages, but her voice didn't shake when she gave them to me. Jason was the hardest piece to move. At first, he refused to believe me. He said Dad's business wasn't perfect, but it wasn't criminal. I showed him the files. I explained how the contracts were rigged, how the payments bounced through 3 countries before they even hit a bank. He went pale. Then he remembered something. Before Elaine was pushed out, she used to handle certain vendor accounts. Jason helped file them one summer during college. He remembered company names that showed up on my shell list. Suddenly, he wasn't the heir anymore. He was a witness. We agreed to insert those companies into the divorce as part of Addendum D, low-value forgotten corporations. Something Franklin would gladly toss aside to look generous. We knew he wouldn't check. He never looked twice at anything he thought he'd already beaten. By the time he signed, it would be over. He'd think he was closing a chapter. He'd be confessing in ink. And I would be waiting in that courtroom, not as his daughter, as the one holding the real ledger now. Franklin leaned back in his chair like a man who had just closed the final deal of his life. He signed the last page with a casual flick of the pen and handed it back to his attorney. Addendum D, the list of old business entities, was now officially part of the record. His smirk was familiar, practiced, and hollow. It was the expression of a man who thought he had just walked away with everything. Across the aisle, my mother sat with her hands folded steady, watching him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. The judge cleared his throat and glanced toward the gallery. Before he could move to the next matter, I stood. The bench creaked beneath me, the scrape of wood sharp in the stillness. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't need to. Your Honor, I said, my voice carrying clear across the room, I'm requesting the court's attention on behalf of the United States Department of Justice. Franklin blinked. The smirk faltered but didn't vanish. He turned toward me, confused, then annoyed. His lawyer started to speak, but the judge raised a hand and nodded for me to proceed. I stepped forward, calm, each movement measured. I asked the judge to turn to the final page of Addendum D. Then I spoke the words I had rehearsed for months. Those companies listed there are not defunct. They are shell corporations linked to a federal investigation into interstate financial fraud and money laundering. I let the silence fill the space after that. Let it sink into the marble and wood. Then I added the final line. By signing that document, Mr. Morgan has just confirmed his ownership of all of them. In legal terms, that is a sworn confession. The courtroom didn't erupt. It inhaled. Franklin went rigid. The blood drained from his face so fast it left behind something hollow and gray. The same hand he used to slap my mother was now trembling. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father afraid. Franklin stood so fast his chair toppled backward. His hand shot out, finger pointed across the courtroom, voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. He didn't look at me. He looked at Elaine as if her presence alone had triggered the fall. He called her useless again, but the word never made it past his lips. The 2 bailiffs had already moved. One grabbed his arm, the other stepped behind, firm and practiced. The metallic snap of cuffs echoed louder than his accusations ever had. His attorney stumbled forward, papers falling from his briefcase, stammering objections that no one listened to. The judge didn't flinch. He had been briefed, prepared for this possibility, and now simply gave a nod to the federal agents entering through the side door. Jason didn't move. His hands rested on his knees, white-knuckled. His eyes followed the cuffs, then my face, and finally settled on our mother. Something changed in him then, subtle but final. A chapter closed behind his eyes. Elaine didn't cry. She didn't flinch or look away. Her back remained straight. Her chin lifted, her eyes locked on the man she had once married. The man who had spent decades making her feel small now stood shackled before her. She didn't need revenge. She needed this moment of truth. As Franklin was led past us, he looked for anything familiar, some anchor, but there was nothing left. No power in the room belonged to him anymore. Only silence followed his exit. The courtroom door shut behind him. A breath was released from the walls, and somewhere deep in that quiet, I felt something shift in all of us. It wasn't triumph. It was release. The restaurant was small, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, with warm light and worn wooden tables that felt lived in. We sat near the window, the three of us, just plates of pasta and laughter between us. It was the kind of evening that didn't need to be earned, just appreciated. Elaine looked different now, not just in her clothes or how she styled her hair, but in how she carried herself. She spoke with animation about her latest interior design project, flipping through photos on her phone, her hands moving freely, her voice full of color. Jason listened without checking his watch. He talked about his new job at a clean investment firm, about learning things from scratch, about finally understanding what integrity in business looked like. He asked me questions with real curiosity and waited for the answers. I had just returned from Washington, where I was given a federal commendation for my role in one of the largest financial crime takedowns that year, but I didn't bring up the plaque. I didn't need to. Elaine had seen the ceremony online. She smiled at me from across the table, like she had known all along what I was capable of. There was no tension, no shadow of control hanging over the meal, no need to filter our words or tiptoe around pride. It wasn't a victory dinner, it was something deeper. A gathering of people who had survived something together and come out better. Elaine clinked her glass against mine, her eyes clear and bright. Jason passed the breadbasket without a word, just a grin, and I realized this was what a real family could feel like. Not perfect, not loud, just safe. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. It was thin, cream-colored, with my name written in sharp, slanted handwriting I hadn't seen in over a year. No return address was needed. The prison stamp said enough. I didn't open it. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window, the letter resting against my palm like it weighed nothing. Maybe it was an apology. Maybe it was a list of justifications or one last attempt to twist the story back in his favor. But I didn't need to know. Whatever words he'd chosen, they couldn't change the truth. He had already said everything that mattered when he thought no one was listening. And I had listened my whole life. I stood and walked to the stove, turned the burner on low, and held the corner of the envelope over the flame. The paper curled, blackened, turned to ash with no ceremony, no fight. Just silence. That letter wasn't a bridge. It wasn't closure. It was a reminder that I didn't owe him another moment of my peace. I had already taken it back. He measured worth in power, in legacy, in who could speak loudest. But I learned something he never did. Real strength doesn't roar, it doesn't demand. It endures. It rebuilds. And when I stepped outside that afternoon, I didn't carry bitterness or regret. Only light.